we're just going to jump in. I'm Chloe Learey. I'm the Executive Director of the Winston Prouty Center, and I chair the Childcare Counts Coalition in Southern Vermont, Windham County. And I am super happy to have Elaine Crawford, a licensing specialist with the Child Development Division, here to talk about licensing. If people want to get into childcare, we hope you'll get licensed. So we thought we'd go right to the source. And Elaine actually works in our region down here, so she's the best person to talk to. So Elaine, thank you so much for coming on board, and we'll dive in. How long have you been a licensor, by the way?
So I have been a licensor for over 18 years. And in that window of time, I've mostly covered Southern Vermont. So I've covered everything through Brattleboro up to Springfield, over to Bennington. Having done it as long as I have, I've had the opportunity to be all the way up through Virgins and things like that. So, but typically I'm in the most southern part of the state. So I really appreciate this opportunity. And so thank you for allowing me as a representative of the licensing field specialist to have this kind of conversations, and any way we can support persons looking to get into the field, we welcome the opportunity. So
that's great. Thank you. Yeah, we experienced you as very supportive. So I think some people get a little scared, like, oh, licensing. And I think the more we can do to say, look, it's just Elaine. Elaine's coming for a visit. It's a great thing.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. And we do recognize when people are nervous or scared, it's because they care about what they do. Mm-hmm. And so that's always our starting point of you're doing this because you care about children, and that's why the nerves kick in. And because it is you care about what you do, and you want to do a great job, and you want that to be recognized. So we do understand that.
Yeah, that's a great one. So we're just going to jump in, and let's start with, what are the first steps in becoming a licensed provider broadly? I know there are a lot of steps, but where would you point somebody if they're starting to think about it?
Okay. So the first thing to know is that in the state of Vermont, if you provide care to more than 2 families of children regularly, then you are required to be registered or licensed. And the global term we use is often licensed, because registration is a type of license. So you'd be required to be licensed in the broad sense. So an individual would want to determine what type of care they want to provide. Do they want to provide in-home care as a registered individual, or a center-based type care? And the applications and the forms vary based on what type of care an individual is intending to provide. With that, the application process does all start at the same point, and that is accessing what we call our Bright Futures Information System, which is our web-based program that covers everything for the Child Development Division, including the application process. Mm-hmm. And that can be accessed through our website. And so that's the easiest way, if you're new to all of this, to link into that. Mm-hmm. So I would share our website, which is DCF for Department for Children and Families, Vermont, spelled out VERMONT, gov, /CDD for Child Development Division. So that's how you get to the information about how to become licensed and registered, and to start the process. On our website, we have, so there would be the link for the application itself, but there's also a tab, I guess it's called a tab, that says becoming a provider. So it goes into detail about the application process, similar to what I'm doing here. So someone would start by accessing our website and getting to that information. And then the first step, the actual step, would be submitting either what we call a preliminary registered home provider application or initial licensing request form. So this is where the process, there's the 2 different kind of paths you would take. Submitting either of those, you would be identifying who the applicant is, so the individual, and the physical location. And then there was the initial record check process for that individual. Mm-hmm. At that point, the application process differ. So there's one path for registered home and another path for licensed centers. But whichever path an individual is on, there are office-based childcare business technicians as well that support you through the process once you've started your application. And there's also access to licensing field specialists like myself through the process. So the business technicians support the individual around completing what steps are required in an application. They contact you directly, they stay with you through the whole process. And the licensor comes in at a different point to support you around what your environment looks like and to help you apply the regulations to your physical space, to your program practices, and answer any questions you have, an individual would have about that. So we really have identified roles within the division to best support applicants as they go through.
That's great. I actually learned something new. I didn't know that. That's awesome. And how long does the application and licensing process usually take, like on average? And I know it's probably really different for registered home versus programs, but in general.
Well, that's a key distinction. For registered homes, it may feel like a simpler process. There may be less outside pieces involved. But there are it takes a varying amount of time based on many factors. So there are some factors that are within the applicant's control. And at other times, they may be reliant on outside entities or approvals. So with that in mind, we'll tell applicants for a licensed program that may take up to 12 weeks. It typically takes less time than that, but some of the factors that will be within control of an applicant are the time frame for, have you completed the full fingerprint process? Have you started that right away in the application procedure? Setting up program space in the home or the center. There may be required safety procedures starting. There may be required safety procedures. There may also be for licensed around starting the permit approval process with either local towns or state agencies, creating some of the handbooks and materials that an applicant would need. All of that's within the applicant's control for the time framing of this. And I would just, as I said, it may take up to 12 weeks. That's what we share on our website. We want applicants to have a reasonable time frame, knowing this is a business decision to open, and we don't want to create any undue stress. It typically does take less time than that. But what I can share for certainty is that when the Child Development Division receives a complete application and it's ready to be processed, we prioritize that, and we can typically turn those around in less than 2 weeks.
That's great. You know, I think I'm surprised that 12 weeks sounds robust, but it certainly sounds, as we think about needing to add slots, that would make a big difference. You know, even if we got one program up and running in the next 3 months in our community, that would make a really big difference. So that's really heartening to hear. We say 12 weeks, and we'd rather encourage an applicant to be pleasantly surprised that they're able to get all of their pieces together. Because what a great position to be ready sooner than you anticipated, rather than have started discussions with parents to have walked all these hired staff, whatever it is that they would look to do. It's a stronger position to along the process be able to anticipate, I don't think it's going to take the 12 weeks, or because their facility needs, it may take the 12 weeks. I need to plan accordingly. So we just want to support reasonable expectations. Again, it's another way to try to support as that gets going. That's a great point. And what are some of the common challenges and obstacles that providers run into as they go through their application? And what are some things that pop up? You mentioned get your fingerprint going, so that's good. Get some permits locally. What can be challenging?
So as I mentioned, that there are some things beyond the applicant's control. Or outside agencies, and that at times can create some challenges. For example, getting all the household members to initiate the required fingerprint clearance process at the time of the application, because it's a multi-step process that includes full fingerprinting and, getting access to a fingerprint location, getting things submitted, things like that. There may be zoning requirements for specific towns. So the local approvals, depending upon what an individual knows about their town, they may actually start that process very early because they know there might be a meeting date that they need to be a part of, and they don't have any control over when that meeting date may be. A proposed facility may need maintenance to meet Division of Fire Safety requirements. Like if it had a different use before, but now you're looking to bring 18-month-olds into a building. What does that mean for fire safety requirements? And so a fire marshal may have expectations of changes to be made. Mm-hmm. There may be wastewater or water usage permits that if it's a change of use of a building, they need to take another set of fresh eyes from Department of Environmental Conservation. And those two that I just mentioned there are specific to licensed programs. So when we're talking about Division of Fire Safety coming in, Department of Environmental Conservation giving a permit, all of that is, well, let me say it this way. All of that is out of residence, would not apply to registration, does not apply to the registration type of care. Would apply to what we call a licensed home, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But so registration, when I talk about outside agencies coming in and doing visits, that does not apply to registration. It applies to center or licensed-based programs.
That's probably heartening to hear for folks who are wanting to open something in their homes, not having all these different departments chomping through necessarily. Because I think that's
sure. Sure. So what I can clarify for, if we're talking home-based providers, the Division of Fire Safety and Division of Environmental Conservation Water, they still have some requirements, but what they've done is embed them in the regulations. So through the application process and through an individual's work with a licensor, they're addressing those pieces. It's not that these agencies say we want nothing to do with it. They say, licensing unit, can you check the exits? Can you make sure there's fire extinguishers? Can you ask them to complete water testing? And so it's built into the work with the licensing unit, as opposed to if you're falling under a license type of program, those agencies come in. That's the distinction.
Yeah, that's great. That seems very friendly somehow. I don't know. It's good. I'm glad to hear it. So there was some updating of childcare regulations in April 2022. And what are some things that happened in that updating that people should be aware of as they look at considering opening a program?
Great. So in this April, there were some clarifications to some existing rules and or addition of a rule for certain sets of regulations, and they were specific to non-discriminatory practices. So it applies across all regulated care settings. So we have different types of regulations. So we have home-based regulations, center-based, and preschool regulations, and after-school regulations. And in all three of those sets, they clarified or added the rules that require inclusive practices, respect for diversity and program planning, activities, and recognition of families' different culture or values or composition. So, and then in addition to adding or clarifying that particular set of section of the rules, they also added rules that state a variance cannot be granted to that section of rules. So a program or registrant cannot ask to not be required for any reason to follow the rules around non-discriminatory practices. And if someone wanted to see those particular changes on our website, on the Child Development Division website, under laws and regulations, we do have highlighted out those particular rule changes. So it would be clear, and it would be very easy to access what those particular changes were. So if someone's familiar with the previous rules, they can simply identify these changes.
And it strikes me like that intention is always there, sort of being explicit about it, or more explicit, would you say? Like it's not a 180, it's let's be more clear about what we've intended. Is that a fair?
Exactly. That's a great way to identify it. It was identified as what's not consistent necessarily in wording or seeming expectation across center type, program type, excuse me. So let's address that and let's identify that there is no reason to grant a variance for this type of regulation. So let's put that out there so the field is clear. And the more clear we can be in our regulations around practices and what the division can do and what a provider is expected to do, it's well worth the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that was targeted as, let's do this now, instead of waiting for whatever next version of regulation updates.
Yeah. Yes, that's great. So what is the difference between a registered and a licensed program? We've talked a little bit about it, so let's drill down into the details.
Okay. A registered, what we call registered family child care home, or just registered, needs to be in the registrant's own residence. So it is based in an individual's home. They are able to provide care up to 6 children under the age of 6, so school age and younger, plus 4 school age children. So a person you can envision you have your 6 that are on kindergarten, younger than kindergarten, and of that 6, 2 can be under the age of 2 if you're working by yourself.
Okay.
If somebody has an assistant, they can have more
Mm-hmm.
under the age of 2. It's about, can you safely get them out?
Mm-hmm.
So you can have 6, and then you can have 4 school agers.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want, so that's for registered. And if someone wanted to provide care to more children in their home, they would follow the licensed family child care home. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that so there's registered, where licensing works with the applicant and the provider through fire safety and all of those pieces. Becoming licensed, then that's another process. Mm-hmm. And those other agencies would also give approvals. But that in that case, you can provide care up to 12 children on a full day basis. Mm-hmm. So there's registered and licensed home care. Then there's what we call straight up licensed programs, which they're typically in public buildings. So think of your freestanding childcare programs, school-based pre-kindergarten classrooms in elementary schools, and many after-school care programs would fall under license. They're going to require municipal approval, so zoning, if that's applicable, relevant state agencies, like I talked about, Division of Fire Safety, Environmental Conservation. So there's a lot more outside agency involvement. And we have separate, that's in the application process. We have separate regulations for home-based, and we make the distinction in those regulations for what's required for registered. Many of the same things are required for a registered home provider as a licensed home provider. We have visual cues in our regulations for what are the pieces only required of a licensed home. So a registered home would not have to follow those additional pieces. And then we have, so that's often referred to as the green book because the cover's green. And then we have the yellow book, which is for center-based childcares and public pre-Ks. So in a center-based program could cover 0 to 12 years of age and could be any number of children from, I believe the smallest program I'm aware of is 6, up to whatever size the building would accommodate. In some cases, that's up to 150. So there's a lot of variation there. And then we also have after-school programs, which the blue book, since I'll keep my theme going, could be school-based after-school activities, could be freestanding buildings as well. But there's some variation in the regulations, the different sets, which accounts for the unique elements of either the age group or the setting. So it's deliberate that they're defined out to be respectful of the difference of the age, potentially when we're talking after school versus center-based, the different ages and the needs of the ages, but also reflective of what's different in the different environments as well.
The Yeah, I was just thinking about the after school. So it's the green book, the yellow book, and the blue book. Is that what it was?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's so funny because everything's online now. So the covers, we don't necessarily look at the hard copies anymore. So
Oh,
if
that's a good point. I'm showing my 18 years of working in licensing.
I need the book. I mean, I can do a quick search online, but I like a book. Um, so if you have school age children in a registered home, that's not, I think that whole aftercare thing, is that usually because they're also providing aftercare? Do you know what I mean? And then is it like a crossover? So if you're a home-based program and you have school-aged kids, the additional 4, is it usual that they're coming after school, or is it like a summer camp? Like what is a scenario where that happens?
So a lot of times, children, the up to 4 school agers that may come to a registered home are often siblings of the younger children that are in care. They can come before school for families that need to go early to work, and children may get on the bus there. They may get dropped off back at the bus. There's some providers that will do that. There's other registered providers who may simply take additional children in the summer, and we have we have charts within our regulations in the family home regulations that help to find out what your numbers can be during the school year and in the summer. Small changes, but very clear in the regulations. But it's typically family units. It doesn't have to be. It can be whatever works for the home-based provider.
That's really good to know, because I think a lot of when we talk about hours of operation for programs, some families, like when you fall outside of that, like you have to get to work by 7:30, but the program opens at 7:30. So that's just so my wheels are turning about that as a interesting solution sometimes for families that people might not know about. So that's great.
And anyone looking to be registered, oftentimes it's individuals who want to be home with their own children is how people start into home-based care. And so they're, depending upon the ages of their own children, they may not count, they don't count in the numbers of children you can provide care to, because that's in that 4-year-old's home, right? So, that's one of the reasons that would be a great time through the application process of where the child business technician or the licensing field specialist would support an applicant around figuring out, well, what does it mean to have a child of this age? What does that mean for your number of children you can have in care and everything else? We provide that direct guidance through the application process.
Yeah, that's great. And I think I'm thinking about how are we going to sort of build capacity in the system, helping people see the advantage to them. If they're up for it, it's it could just feel like a win-win for sure. So what happens during a home visit from a licensing field specialist?
Okay. So they're typically, when you say a licensing field specialist visit, it's typically what we call our unannounced compliance visit. So that means that the center or home provider doesn't know the licensor is coming. It's our opportunity to see a moment in time, and we will knock on your door or walk in the center. We certainly introduce ourselves. We always have a identifying badge as well as business card. The intention is to join right into the program activities. So if a home provider is outside, we'll join outside activities. If a center is, we walk into a classroom and they're conducting circle, we'll stay to the back and circle continues. Each visit might vary slightly depending upon the time of day that we're there and the activities taking place at the time of our visit. We will often ask questions to familiarize ourselves. Some of those standard questions are the ages of the children, if what we're seeing is a typical day, or is there some reason why it's unique? And if so, please share that. We can only respond to what we see, but but it's important for us to understand if it's not the typical practice. If it's a home-based program, we're going to ask who lives in the home and what spaces of the home are used. We'll do observations. So that's kind of where we stand and watch, and what we're looking for are what are the interactions of the adults with children. If a child cries, are they responding to it? Is a provider speaking to children at eye level? Is it appropriate tone, appropriate volume, and everything I'm referencing ties back to a specific regulation. So anything we're looking at is actually in the regulation. So ideally, if a provider wonders, they can always see those pieces too to help build your confidence before a licensor comes. But again, we'll look at the eye level, responding to children may cry, tone and volume. Are they offering appropriate activities for the ages and number of children that are in care? Is guidance positive in nature? Is it encouraging self-esteem, cooperation, conflict resolution? Are children effectively supervised so that the provider knows where they are at all times and is close enough to intervene? We'll look at some health and safety basics about a space. Is the space clean? Are there any hazards inside or outside in spaces that children use? Do children and staff wash their hands? Diaper changing practices? Mentioned Division of Fire Safety. We may look at fire extinguishers. We're talking about in a home. So these are all the things specific to what we look at in a home. Yeah. We do ask to see some paperwork. We'll want to see children's attendance records. Have you been conducting fire drills, children's files, and things like that.
Yeah.
And I would also add, we may ask about some practices that we won't see in the visit. For example, if a licensor is there in the morning, I'll speak for myself. As a licensor, if I'm there in the morning, I'm not going to see rest time. Right. So I don't see rest time. So I'm going to ask you about that. I'm going to ask a provider about that practice. Mm-hmm. If we're not there during mealtime, we'll ask about what does snack look like? What does lunch look like? With all that being said, knowing that we're talking about home-based care, there's one, maybe two adults. So we recognize the needs of the children always come first. So there may be times where I may start a question, but I may back off because I can see that there's a need to meet their needs first. And we absolutely respect that the providers need to still meet their needs and to do that first. And we'll wait for whatever time we need to do that. Mm-hmm. At the end of a visit, we always communicate to the provider what the findings are. So what areas of compliance we identified that we saw you're meeting the rules, we give that list of here are all the ways that you're in compliance is the phrasing we use. In compliance means you're meeting the requirement of a specific rule. And then if there's any areas found not to be being met, any particular specific rules, we would go over what that violation is and and start the conversation around, okay, how can you correct this and what time frame do you need to correct this? Mm-hmm. And then we follow through with our written reports around those pieces getting addressed.
Mm-hmm. How long does it usually last a visit, or does it really vary?
It's usually to a registered home. It's usually about an hour to an hour and a half. But for the reasons I mentioned, if there are children's needs, it may be extended because we want to leave the space that the programming is needing at that time. If a visit goes longer than that, it may be because we're going through paperwork and it's set up in a manner we're not familiar with, but we just have to orient ourselves to it. I think we say anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, I believe is kind of standard. And then if there is some ability to be flexible around that last piece I talked about, where we give the findings for the visit. Mm-hmm. So if our presence, if a visit is ending, say right at rest time, and a provider needs to be meeting to assist the children to sleep, mm-hmm. we may arrange to talk by phone mm-hmm. later in the day, because it's unfair to the children and the provider to take away from that window of time. But typically anywhere from 1 to 2 hours is a safe estimate.
Yeah. And I just want to, when you're talking about that, talking about findings and sharing, I heard you say, if there's a violation, talking about how can you fix it? What time frame do you need to fix it? It just, back to the thing that might scare people. I hear in that, at least the way you're presenting it, that this is really a partnership. Like everybody wants success here. Nobody's looking for a problem, and so that, framing this as partnership around being successful, I hope helps people maybe not be so nervous about the visit, but just to say.
Yeah, I appreciate the extra time to kind of speak to that point. I mean, we all have a shared goal, and that shared goal is for children to have a safe, fun, enriching environment. And we're looking at it, the regulations are an opportunity to meet really the kind of public need of what is the foundation requirements. And so I talked about Division of Fire Safety, Environmental Conservation, Department of Health, and parents. Everyone participates in what was the dialogue around creating regulations. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at these pieces, it's what's the scope of going on in a program. I will say that there are many really, really great providers that in a moment of time have been cited for violations. Mm-hmm. And then it's corrected. Mm-hmm. It's corrected. Mm-hmm. And that's why I started with, we speak to the areas of compliance. Right. Because that's an important full picture, isn't it? To say, all of these things are going well. Here's an area that with another set of eyes, we've identified there's steps to be taken or enhancing what you're doing to meet the requirement. And in our process, we list in our information, a provider is required to, at a certain date, make the corrections and send an email, or however we ask them, they confirm that it's done. That varies on what it is. Then that gets listed in our system. So parents looking through our public access to regulatory history would see, okay, they met their requirement, they fixed it, it's gone forward. Yeah. So there, we really want to present the full picture. And many of us have been providers. I myself have been a provider. I've had the licensor come in. I've had violations cited. We've all had, many of us have had that experience. And again, starting with, it's a shared goal for children's environments, knowing there can be moments of time where there can be noncompliance, and it's an opportunity to move forward.
Yeah, not getting in trouble, but having a chance to make it.
Right. And we recognize, I think I said earlier, that people get into this line of work because they care about children and they want to provide an environment. So we always know that's the starting point. Yeah. And we just keep going forward from there.
Yeah. I think one thing that might intimidate people about considering setting up a program in their home is they might have to make big changes to their home. So are there, what are some of the changes you've seen, or what people had to make, or does that come up very often?
It's a great question. So I think it can feel like a big lift or a big source of anxiety before starting the process. So really what we find is in a kitchen or a bathroom, kind of take a look at where, in the case of the kitchen, where a chemical's stored, where a knife's stored, looking at where can little hands get into. And if are these items in cabinets that are accessible to children? Okay, so if you're balancing your family needs with opening this business, do you have safety latches on those cabinets, or do you move items? That's a decision that the homeowner, before they open their registered home, would need to make. But a safety lock that a child can't open, but you as an adult can open, meets the requirements. When it comes to bathrooms, it's around what are accessible personal items, whether they be in the vanity or maybe even in the shower. If you have preschoolers that go into a bathroom on their own, or what are products? One of the things that we often talk about are what are products that on the back labels say keep out of reach of children. There are more products that have that on there than we may typically think about. So one of the changes is not that you don't have these products in your home. It's just, what does it mean to read that? Where are medications stored in a home? what we have medicine cabinets in our bathrooms, but are you taking 6, 7, 8-year-olds in after school? Is that accessible to them? So where do you store those types of things? So that's kind of specific around hazards and access to hazards. In general, things that often come up might be taking a look at your stairs. If you're using the first floor of your home and you have a second story and you have stairs to a second story, do you have a gate on those stairs so children can't access the stairs? For outside play, is there a water source in the yard you plan to use? Is the road close by? Is it likely you need a fence, or do you have a natural tree line that goes 3 sides around? And those are the types of things that a licensor, any of those things I just mentioned, would be part of the work that the licensor would do on the visit to the home before it's opened. That's the technical assistance on site in your home that a licensor can provide. So in that visit from a licensor, we're not expecting that everything's 100% correct. And it's our opportunity to provide guidance and support and help put that lens of regulatory compliance on a home.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like the fence is one that comes up a lot. I hear people talking like, and they're expensive and it takes years, months to get them right now. But
and the way the rule is written is it's not to say everyone needs a fence.
Right.
So but we can understand that fear that if I want to, or that assumption that if I want to provide care, I have to have a fence. Right. There has to be no access to hazards. And do you have natural barriers? And what might those natural barriers be?
And if you do need a fence, my hope is that we can build a sort of a bank of resources to help somebody get a fence. So it's not necessarily all, that on the person wanting to start the business, that there will be those of us in the community who might be able to help make it happen if you need to. And
even for providers that need a fence, that it's determined they need a fence because, let's say, there's an accessible water source that's more than a creek. It's it's a pond, something like that. If they want to get open in December, January, February, we're not going to stop that process. We're going to work with them around what are additional safety precautions. And again, that would be a dialogue to allow that business to open. So there is the ability to support and provide technical assistance and identify what needs to happen, but still allow a provider who may or may need a fence, if it's determined they need a fence, to still open in those months when putting in a fence wouldn't be possible. But again, that's specifically working with that licensor, and that would be a start of a conversation of how to do that, not a break point in the process.
Great, that's awesome. And who can providers contact if they have questions about licensing or regulations? I bet it's on your website. No. What is the easiest way to get in touch?
So it's there. The easiest way would probably be using what we call our licensor on duty line. So we have an 800 number. So the Child Development Division has an 800 number that will get you into the Child Development Division. To speak directly to the licensor on duty, you call that number, which is 800-649-2642, and you would select option 3. We also have a licensor on duty email, if that is easier for someone. And this is a bit cumbersome. So that is AHS for Agency of Human Services, period, DCF for Department of Children and Families, CDD for Child Development Division, childcare licensing, no spaces in any of that. So there's only one period between AHS and DCF, and then it's all together, at vermont.gov. And that information is also available on our website, how to access us through that. The licensor on duty line, whether it be telephone or email, is manned every day by someone like myself. We rotate that responsibility. We are typically able to return phone calls within 2 hours or in the same day. If a call comes in later in the day, or if there's perhaps some additional research needed before answering the question or providing the guidance, it may be the next business day.
Yeah. Still, that's great.
So also available, we also have information when you're on the website. You'll see that there's some additional information to provide some guidance.
How many calls come in a day?
It varies. It really varies. Certain times of the year, the volume is certainly higher. You can imagine as school is ramping up, we start to get questions as home providers are looking at what they're going to do for the summer. Right in mid-June, we might get more calls. If there's information the division sends out about, the child development division sends out grant information, things like that. The licensor on duty line is often the entry for providers or applicants to say, I'm not sure who I need to speak to. Can you help me? And so we may not be the ones to provide the information, but we can connect you with who can.
Great. One more question. What advice do you have for how people who have successfully opened a program can sort of, follow, maintain, stay up to date with regulations and, knowing that we can always improve, but once they open their doors, what's the best way to stay up to date?
Well, first and foremost, I would encourage any applicant or licensed program or registrant to always feel they can reach out to the licensor on duty. If it's about regulatory application or any questions about the regulations, certainly always reach out. Again, the shared goal, we want to be able to provide you that technical assistance. We want to be able to do so in a way that you can readily apply that information and feel confident in what it is you're providing the children, meeting that it meets regulations. We also have written information that remains available. So I mentioned our website, but on the when you go to the website, I mentioned the laws and regulations section. That will bring you to electronic versions of the regulations. On that same page, there's also what we call guidance manuals. So there's a guidance manual for each of the 3 sets of regulations, the rules. And in the guidance manuals, it may provide some supporting information around different regulations. For example, we have requirements around cushioning material under certain height play equipment.
Yep.
In the guidance manual, it will talk about, there's this national resource that will help you find out what depth you need based on your equipment, or clarifying some greater understanding of how to apply a rule. We also have on the website frequently asked questions that get updated intermittently. So if we're finding there's trends coming into the licensor on duty line or trends in that we're aware of in some fashion, we'll post information there to support the rest of the field around that. Child Development Division also has on our website the opportunity to sign up for email notifications from the division. So that licensing updates would be part of those notifications that could be received. And then the licensing unit will do a newsletter throughout the year. And again, there we may talk about what are trends in the field, what are licensors seeing, what are we proactively wanting providers to give thought to. Season changes are a great example of what may be covered in a newsletter. Have you given thought to what it means to now be in the winter months and safe outdoor play, things like that.
That's a lot of resources. That's great. Lots of different ways to access. And I do think, when you're talking about visiting a registered home, the fact that you're in someone's home and depending on the number of adults there, just the environment is very, different. And so having, I hear a lot of folks who have home-based programs just, talk about, you can't sit down at the computer and check your email necessarily, but so having a bunch of different ways or picking up the phone or whatever, it just seems like seems really helpful. So this is great.
Well, thank you for saying that, because we do recognize that every person that's working directly with children is focused on working with those children. So part of creating we have the LOD email, so you can send it off in the moment that you're able to do it. And then you can get your answer when it's readily available, when the time is available to you.
Yeah.
As opposed to those moments where someone has to carve out 20 minutes during rest time and do it that way. So we're hopeful that the different means that we have can meet the different needs of providers across the different types. So it's good to hear that it comes across that way.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time. And I'm hopeful that people who have listened to this will feel inspired to at least start checking out the resources, because it sounds like there are a lot of them, and that CDD and licensors are ready to help, which is greatly appreciated. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I know that we all get excited when there's more providers coming into the community. The more robust and early childhood community we can have, we all benefit, and certainly so do families and children. So in whatever way the Child Development Division and the licensing unit in particular can support that, we absolutely want to.
Great. Thank you.